Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are doing something a little different. We are not waiting in the shallow end of safe topics. We are heading straight into the eye of the cultural storm. We've got a stack of research, some very controversial data, and one incredibly provocative new book. We are going to unpack a topic that most mainstream outlets are absolutely terrified to touch. But before we get into the trenches, and believe me, we are going deep today, do me a huge favor. Hit that like button and subscribe. If you want us to keep bringing you these deep dives into the texts that are shaking up the status quo, we need your support to keep the lights on. So lock it in.
And shaking up the status quo might be an understatement for today's text. We're looking at the Manosphere Messiah. He is Outstanding, You Are Shit, and Women Choosing Spinsterhood by Conrad Riker.
Yeah, even the title pulls no punches. And look, having read through this, I think it's important to frame this correctly right off the bat. Riker isn't positioning this as your standard self-help book. He explicitly calls it a war manual. He describes it as a manifesto for the modern man who feels like the ground is just shifting beneath his feet.
Exactly. And to understand the book, you have to understand who Riker is writing for. This isn't really for the general public who wants, a soft, easy read. This is a deep dive specifically for men's rights activists, the red-pilled, and men who feel that modern society has effectively declared war on their biology. Riker is arguing that what we call progress has actually been a systematic dismantling of masculinity, and he's brought the receipts to prove it.
It is ultra-long, incisive, and honestly fascinating, regardless of where you stand. It challenges pretty much everything we're told to believe about gender, history, and society.
Yeah.
If you want to get the full war manual experience, and we can only cover so much in our time here, you need to check this out. It's on Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now. It's dense with data.
Yeah. So let's look at the roadmap Riker lays out. He covers the biological imperative of male leadership, the idea that our institutions, schools, churches, universities, have been captured by feminist and Marxist ideologies, and the massive economic fallout of abandoning traditional gender roles.
Let's start with biology, because this is really the foundation of Riker's entire argument. He goes straight for the jugular of the egalitarian myth. That idea we learned in Sociology 101 that in our natural hunter-gatherer state, men and women were basically interchangeable, holding hands and singing songs.
Right. He brings up the famous studies of the Kungsan people of the Kalahari. For years, specifically in the 1970s, anthropologists held them up as this paradise of gender equality. They claimed that because women gathered nuts and roots, which provided a steady baseline of calories, they had equal political power to the men. It was the perfect academic narrative.
But Riker says, hold on, look at the actual data. He re-examines that research and points out a massive oversight. Yes, the gathering provided calories, but who handled the crises? When there was a conflict over water rights with a neighboring tribe, or when a predator threatened the camp, it wasn't a committee of grandmothers handling it.
It was the men. And specifically, Riker talks about the politics of meat. While gathering provided sustenance, the men provided the high-value protein, the meat from the hunt. In a calorie-scarce environment, bringing home a gazelle wasn't just about dinner. It was a massive transfer of power and status. The successful hunters dictated the movement of the tribe.
So his argument is that leadership isn't just a social construct we made up, it's an evolutionary adaptation.
Precisely. He calls the alternative the matriarchy myth. Riker argues that hierarchies based on male competence are natural and necessary for survival. And to prove this, he uses a really striking and honestly kind of hilarious example from the 1980s, the feminist communes.
Oh, this part was wild. He details these places like Rainbow Moon in Oregon. These were attempts to build utopias completely without men. No male energy allowed on the premises.
And they collapsed, almost universally. Riker details how they refused to allow men in, even for heavy infrastructure work. There's this one story that really illustrates his point about a woman named Lydia. She was trying to install a massive 40-pound solar panel array on the roof of the main lodge.
Right, and physics doesn't care about your ideology. It was too heavy for her to leverage safely.
Exactly. She realized she couldn't do it without risking injury or breaking the expensive equipment. So out of desperation, she called a local handyman from the nearby town to come help her hoist it.
And the response from the commune wasn't, thanks for getting the power on, Lydia.
Far from it. Riker details that they held a 14-hour consensus meeting. 14 hours. They debated whether she had betrayed the sovereignty of the land by letting a biological male onto the property. They shamed her for hours. Eventually, the commune fell apart because, as Riker puts it, you can't build a society on an ideology that ignores physics. They eventually had to hire men secretly at night to fix the generators and chop the wood because the winter was coming and they were freezing.
That is quite an image. The takeaway Riker is driving at here is that when crises happen, when the heater breaks or the food runs out, societies default to male leadership, not because of oppression, but for survival. He argues that removing men from the equation results in inefficiency and eventual collapse.
And he traces this removal of men from the communes right into our modern institutions. He calls it the capture. Specifically, how schools have turned into what he calls the beta orbit.
This is a heavy section. Riker argues that the education system has effectively pathologized normal male behavior.
Well, think about what makes a boy biologically. High energy, roughness, a desire for competition, a desire to test boundaries. Riker argues these are the traits that historically built civilizations. You need that energy to explore frontiers or build skyscrapers. But in a modern classroom, those traits are diagnosed as ADHD or labeled toxic.
There was a specific anecdote that really stuck with me. A 6-year-old boy in Texas was suspended for playing cops and robbers at recess. He was just using his finger as a gun, running around imagining he was a sheriff.
Riker points out the context there. The boy was imagining authority. He was imagining being a protector, a good guy stopping bad guys. But the school called it aggressive play and said it was triggering for the other students.
Meanwhile, Riker contrasts that with a girl in the same school who staged a fake breakup with an imaginary boyfriend, causing a scene. She was praised for her emotional expressiveness.
It's the double standard. Riker uses this to illustrate that imagination is good unless it involves power, dominance, or combat, then it's a threat. He argues we are medicating the boy out of boys to make them easier to manage in a classroom setting that's really designed for girls.
And it's not just schools, though. Riker goes deep into religion. He has a chapter called Christ the Conqueror. This completely reframes how we look at the church.
It does. Riker argues that the church, much like schools, has been captured by feminist ideology. He says we've traded the image of the table-flipping warrior who challenged the Pharisees and spoke of spiritual warfare for a gentle hippie in a linen dress who just wants everyone to be nice.
He calls it the feminization of religion, and he points to the decline in male attendance as proof.
The data is stark. Riker shows that as churches moved away from messages of duty, command, and sacrifice and moved toward feelings, inclusion, and inner peace, male attendance just plummeted. His point is that men are looking for a mission. They want to be challenged. They don't want a therapy session with hymns.
So, if men are being pushed out of their spiritual role as protectors and their educational role as competitors, what happens when they enter the economy? Riker has a theory called the red pill economy.
This is where he connects the culture war to your wallet. Riker argues that feminism didn't just change the workplace vibe, it fundamentally broke the middle class. It's a basic supply and demand argument.
Explain that for us.
Riker posits that by doubling the labor supply entering women into the workforce en masse over a very short period, we drove down the value of labor. Wages stagnated because there were suddenly twice as many workers competing for jobs. Suddenly, you needed two incomes to maintain the standard of living that one income used to provide in the 1950s.
And the consequence of that is that child rearing gets outsourced.
Yeah.
We pay strangers to raise our kids so we can work to pay for the strangers to raise our kids.
Which leads to what Riker calls fatherless America. He throws some grim statistics at the reader here. He correlates fatherlessness directly with crime, drug abuse, and incarceration. He argues that in many communities, the state has effectively replaced the father.
Because of the welfare cliffs, right?
Exactly. Riker breaks down how the welfare system penalizes marriage. If a single mother marries a working man, she often loses her benefits. So the government is literally paying fathers to stay away.
And on the flip side of that, Riker goes after the narrative sold to women. He calls it the feminine void. This is his controversial take on the whole girl boss era.
He talks about the fertility cliff and the lie of having it all. Riker argues that women have been sold a bill of goods, that a career in marketing or HR will provide the same deep soul satisfaction as raising a family.
He paints a pretty bleak picture of that lifestyle. He talks about the woman who spends her 20s and 30s chasing a VP title, grinding 60 hours a week, only to wake up at 45 with a lot of nice shoes, a pristine condo, and absolute silence when she comes home.
He calls it legacy without love. And he specifically mentions that corporate feminism really only benefits elite women. They get the board seats and the book deals. But for the working class, Riker argues, the family unit has been crushed so that corporations can have cheaper labor. He believes the fulfillment of the traditional mother has been traded for the misery of the corporate drone. And he cites antidepressant usage rates among women to back that up.
It's a harsh assessment, but Riker insists the data is there. And this economic and social tension bleeds right into the most volatile part of the book, the sexual marketplace.
This is where Riker breaks down the 80-20 rule, which is a staple concept in the Manosphere, but he goes deeper.
Yeah, he says on dating apps, it's not even 80-20 anymore. It's more like the top 80% of women are competing for the top 10% or even 5% of men, while completely ignoring the vast majority of guys.
He discusses the invisible mode feature on apps like Tinder. He notes that a huge percentage of women use features to browse without being seen. Riker interprets this as the ultimate hypergamy. Women want to shop for men-like products without the accountability of being shopped for in return. It creates a hyper-competitive, incredibly hostile environment for the average man.
And this leads to the double bind. I found this concept really interesting because it explains so much of the confusion modern guys feel.
It's the trap. Riker says men are told by society, by the media, by their teachers, even by their mothers, to be vulnerable, soft, and nice. But Riker argues that biologically, women are repulsed by male weakness in a mating context.
So if a guy acts nice, he gets friend-zoned or rejected as boring. But if he takes charge and acts dominant,
he's labeled toxic. That's the double bind. You're punished for your biology, but rejected for suppressing it. Riker asserts that toxic masculinity is just a weaponized term for traits that are actually essential for survival aggression, risk-taking, stoicism. He says society relies on these toxic traits to build the roads, fight the fires, and defend the borders, but then demonizes those same men in the culture pages.
And speaking of demonizing, he pushes back hard against the idea of male privilege. I think this is one of the strongest data sections in the book.
He calls male privilege a statistical smokescreen. He lists the counterarguments. Suicide rates are 3.6 times higher for men. Men make up 92% of workplace fatalities. That's a staggering number. 92% of the people dying on the job are men. Homelessness is overwhelmingly male. And of course, men are the primary victims of war.
He calls it the glass cellar, right? We talk about the glass ceiling for women, but we ignore the glass cellar where millions of men are trapped in dangerous, dirty, or despairing situations.
Exactly. His point is that while a tiny percentage of men are at the very top, the CEOs and politicians, the vast majority of the suffering at the bottom is also male, and society has zero empathy for them.
So we've painted a picture here. The biology is denied, the institutions are captured, the economy is rigged against the family, and the dating market is a minefield. What is the solution? Riker doesn't just complain, he offers a strategy.
He calls for rebuilding the tribe. He talks about the brotherhood code. Riker argues that men have lost their exclusive spaces. Lodges, scouts, male-only clubs have all been forced to integrate or have shut down. He says men need to rebuild them, underground if necessary.
He gives a specific example of the Iron Tribe in Austin, Texas. This isn't just a gym.
No, it's a ritual. This is a group of men who meet at 6 a.m. to lift heavy weights. But the key detail Riker emphasizes is what they don't do. They don't have therapy circles. They don't check in about their feelings using I statements.
They don't pass the talking stick.
Right. They hold each other accountable through physical exertion and shared hardship. If you're late, the whole group pays for it. Riker argues this builds a bond that vulnerability never can. It reconstructs that hunter-gatherer reliance on one another.
And he also has a very serious warning about what happens when men don't do this, when they try to play by the nice guy rules. He brings up Elliot Rodger, the Isla Vista shooter.
It's a chilling section, but crucial to his argument. Riker obviously isn't condoning what Rodger did, but he uses him as a dark warning. He argues Rodger's what happens when a man believes the lie that being nice, polite, and compliant entitles him to love and sex.
Rodger thought he was following the rules, and when the reward didn't come, he snapped.
Exactly. Riker's message is, stop trying to negotiate desire. Stop trying to be a good boy, hoping for a treat. It doesn't work, and it leads to resentment and rage. Men need to build actual value, competence, strength, resources, not just seek approval.
That leads to his final chapter, the call to lead. He says men must stop apologizing, ignore the woke cathedral, as he calls the university and media system, and embrace the role of provider and protector.
He emphasizes that this leadership isn't about asking for permission. It's about stepping into the vacuum. He says, look around. Families are failing. Communities are fragmented. If men don't lead, nobody else is going to fix it.
Which brings us to the end of the book. It's a heavy read, packed with anger, but also a very specific kind of hope for his audience.
Riker leaves us with a final provocative thought, an ultimatum, really. He says, civilizations collapse when they run out of children and strong men. The choice, in his view, is between leading without apology or extinction.
It's a stark choice. Leading without apology. If you want to dive deeper into these arguments, and believe me, we left a lot on the table, specifically regarding the legal bias in family courts, you need to follow the author. You can find him at Conrad Riker on Twitter or X, and check out his Substack for the uncensored content where he really lets loose.
And again, this is a dense text. If you are interested in the history of how institutions shifted or the specific data on the sexual marketplace, you should go to the source.
Absolutely. Go to Amazon Kindle or Google Playbooks right now and buy the Manosphere Messiah. Whether you are looking for answers or just want to understand the manual that thousands of men are reading right now, it is an essential purchase. It's an ultra-long, incisive read that you won't be able to put down.
It challenges pretty much every assumption of modern culture.
And that's what we do here. We look at the ideas that are shaping the conversation, even the ones, especially the ones that the mainstream ignores. Thanks for listening to this deep dive. Make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. We'll see you then.